It was just after noon on a quiet Thursday when Derek Langston walked into Jefferson State Bank in Little Rock. The sun outside was blazing, but inside the air was cool, polished floors gleaming under fluorescent lights. People were lined up with forms and checks, talking in soft tones. Nothing looked unusual until he stepped through the door. Derek was calm, tall, and sharply dressed in a charcoal gray suit. His shoes were polished, his movements confident but humble. Yet the moment he appeared, eyes followed him. The security guard at the entrance gave him a polite nod. "Afternoon, sir." Derek smiled back. "Afternoon." He walked toward the teller line, waiting quietly behind an elderly couple laughing about their grandson's baseball game. He wasn't in a hurry, he never was. Years of training had taught him patience, the kind that could turn silence into power. When it was his turn, he stepped forward. "Good afternoon," he said gently. "I'm here to finalize a wire transfer. I spoke with someone yesterday about verifying documents." The teller, a young woman named Brianna, smiled professionally. "Of course, sir. May I see your ID?" Derek handed over 2 cards, a passport and a federal identification badge. Brianna's smile froze for a split second. She glanced down, her eyes scanning the card longer than usual. Something about it made her tense up. She looked back at her screen, typing faster than necessary. "One moment, sir," she said, voice tight. "I'll just have my manager take a look at this." Derek nodded, calm as ever. He'd seen that look before. The pause, the flicker of doubt, the quiet whisper that followed. He moved aside as she called for her manager. From across the room, he saw a man step out of a glass office, mid-40s, thinning hair, wire-frame glasses, the kind of man who thought authority came with a desk. His nameplate read Philip Corbin, Branch M, Enager. Corbin gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good afternoon, sir. Could we speak in my office for a moment?" Derek tilted his head slightly. "Is there a problem?" Corbin laughed nervously. No, just a standard verification procedure for large transfers." Inside the office, Corbin shut the door. The glass walls allowed everyone outside to see the 2 men, one seated calmly, the other fidgeting behind his desk. "So," Corbin began, "you're moving $1.2 million?" "Yes," Derek replied evenly. "From my private account to a business trust. Everything should be pre-approved." Corbin's eyes darted to the screen. Right, it's just... The system flagged your ID, nothing personal." Derek leaned forward slightly. "You called someone, didn't you?" Corbin froze. "Excuse me?" "I know what a trace call looks like," Derek said quietly. "You contacted the authorities." Corbin swallowed hard, pretending to smile. "Sir, we just need to confirm some things. It's procedure." "Procedure," Derek repeated slowly, "or prejudice." The manager's face flushed red. "That's not fair, sir. I treat all customers equally." "Do you?" Derek asked, his tone calm but cutting. "Because I've been sitting here for 15 minutes and your hands haven't stopped shaking." Outside, people were starting to notice. Brianna whispered to a coworker. A man in line turned his phone toward the glass wall. The atmosphere shifted, curiosity, then unease. Corbin stood up abruptly. "If you'll excuse me, I'll just, make another quick call." He left the office and walked briskly to the back hallway, picking up the landline behind a security door. His voice was low but urgent. "Yes, this is Philip Corbin at Jefferson State Bank. I already reported the incident." "Yes, the man's still here. African-American male, late 30s. He's using what appears to be a federal ID, possibly fake. He claims to be transferring over $1 million. I think it's fraud. You'd better send someone." He listened for a moment. "What do you mean? Do not approach? What kind of flag is this?" Before he could ask more, a sound made him turn. Sirens, faint but growing. 2 black SUVs pulled up outside the bank. Customers turned their heads. Doors opened and men in suits stepped out, silent, focused, wearing earpieces. They didn't rush. They moved with purpose. The glass doors parted. Inside, the atmosphere froze. Every eye followed the men as they scanned the room, badges glinting. Without a word, they walked straight toward Corbin's office. Derek stood as they entered. His face was calm, unreadable. The taller agent removed his sunglasses, looked at Derek, and suddenly snapped to attention. He raised his hand in a crisp salute. The second agent followed suit. Gasps filled the room. Phones were raised. Corbin stood in the corner, pale and confused. What's going on? The agent's voice was steady. You just called the FBI on Colonel Derek Jerome Langston, former Deputy Director of the Joint Counterintelligence Task Force. The entire bank fell silent. Corbin's lips trembled. I didn't know. Derek said nothing. He just looked at the man who had tried to humiliate him. There was no anger in his eyes, only quiet disappointment. The agent turned toward Corbin. Do you even understand what you just did? You triggered a restricted file alert. You're lucky he didn't take this personally. Corbin stammered. I thought he was black? Derek finally spoke, his voice low but firm. That's what you thought. The words landed heavier than any punch. The agents lowered their hands. One of them turned to Derek. Sir, our apologies. We'll handle the rest. Derek nodded, then looked back at Corbin one last time. Next time you judge someone by their color, remember this moment. He walked out slowly, the crowd parting in silence. Phones recorded, whispers filled the room, but no "oh-cease" said a word to stop him. As the doors closed behind him, Corbin sank into his chair, realizing the truth. He hadn't just called the FBI on a man, he'd called them on a hero. The moment Derek Langston stepped out of the bank, the heat of the Arkansas sun hit his face, but it wasn't the temperature that burned. It was the silence behind him. That thick, uneasy silence of realization, regret, and shame. He could feel the eyes through the glass as he walked toward his car, calm, composed, his shoes clicking on the pavement. The same people who had stared with suspicion now looked with awe. He didn't need to say a word. His dignity had already spoken louder than any defense. Behind the glass doors, chaos unfolded. The manager, Philip Corbin, was pale, his tie loosened, hands shaking. The agents hadn't left yet. They were talking quietly, their tone sharp and controlled. You had no reason to make that call, one of them said coldly. The ID you questioned is above your clearance level. Corbin's throat went dry. I was just following protocol. I didn't mean... The agent interrupted. You didn't mean to racially profile a decorated intelligence officer who's done more for this country than you can imagine? Corbin had no answer. His eyes darted to Brianna, who stood frozen at her counter. The customers whispered in small circles, pretending not to listen but hanging on to every word. The moment that was supposed to humiliate Derek had humiliated Corbin instead. Outside, Derek opened his car door but paused. He looked down at the reflection on the tinted window. His own face, calm but tired. He'd been through worse, much worse. Desert missions, hostage rescues, classified investigations. But no battlefield had ever made him feel this kind of exhaustion, the quiet ache that came when ignorance replaced respect. He sat in his car, breathing slowly. His phone buzzed. A mess. Sage from an unknown number. Sir, this is Agent Hines. We'll handle the situation. No further action needed unless you wish to file an official complaint. Derek smiled faintly. No need. He didn't want revenge. He wanted understanding. He started the engine and drove off. Inside the bank, Corbin collapsed into his chair. His assistant poked her head in nervously. Mr. Corbin, should I resume transactions? He nodded weakly. Yes, just give me a moment. He stared at the floor, then at the empty chair where Derek had sat. The same chair where he had questioned a man's right to exist beyond suspicion. The scene replayed in his mind over and over. Derek's calm voice, the salute, the silence. For the rest of that day, he couldn't focus. Every sound, the printer, the phones, even the air conditioner, felt too loud. He tried to bury himself in paperwork, but guilt crawled through every line of text. By closing time, he couldn't take it anymore. That night, he searched Derek Langston's name on his laptop. The results hit him like a storm. Colonel Derek J. Langston, awarded for service in counterintelligence operations in Syria and Afghanistan. Oversaw rescue missions for civilians during covert evacuations. former Deputy Director of Joint Counterintelligence Task Force, honored speaker at national security conferences. Article after article, medal after medal. The same man he had doubted, profiled, and humiliated was a hero of national security. Corbin's heart sank. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen until the words blurred. "What have I done?" he whispered. The next morning, Derek received a call. Unknown number again. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Langston, this is Philip Corbin from Jefferson State Bank." Derek was silent. I wanted to apologize, sir. Deeply. I had no right to assume. No right to act the way I did. I'm truly sorry." Derek's tone was calm but distant. "You didn't just doubt my identity, Mr. Corbin. You doubted my integrity. You saw my skin before you saw my credentials." "I know," Ed Corbin said softly, "and I'll live with that shame. I've already filed a report taking full responsibility. I can only ask for your forgiveness." Derek paused. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the lesson, Mr. Corbin. Make sure this never happens to another person again. That's the only apology that matters." He ended the call. Corbin sat back, tears stinging his eyes. That conversation, calm, controlled, and painfully dignified, hurt more than any insult could have. Later that week, news of the incident spread. Someone had uploaded a video clip to social media, the agents walking in, the salute, the crowd's reaction. It went viral. Millions watched. Headlines read, "Bank calls FBI on black man. Turns out he's a war hero." Public outrage followed. The bank's head office issued a public statement calling the incident regrettable and promising internal review. But for Derek, it wasn't about trending hashtags. It was about what lay beneath, the unseen bias that still existed everywhere he went. He sat one evening on his porch sipping coffee as the sun set. His old military medals hung in a case behind him, glinting faintly in the fading light. He'd never worn them for show. He'd earned them through sacrifice, through choices no one else had to make. And yet, even with all that, a simple trip to the bank had reduced him to suspicion again. But he wasn't bitter. No, Derek believed in something deeper, that respect must be taught, not demanded. Meanwhile, Corbin was called into headquarters. The regional director sat across from him, stern-faced. "You've brought unwanted attention to this institution, Philip. The board is not pleased." "I understand," Corbin murmured. "You'll attend mandatory training on discrimination and bias, effective immediately." He nodded silently, grateful not to be fired. But deep down, he knew training wouldn't fix what he'd done. Only Humies. Liddy could. That night he typed a letter, handwritten, honest, and heavy with regret. "Dear Colonel Langston, I can't undo my actions, but I can learn from them. You taught me something I'll never forget. True honor doesn't wear a uniform. It carries itself with grace, even in the face of ignorance. Thank you for your patience when I showed you none. Sincerely, Philip Corbin." He sealed the letter and sent it. He didn't expect a reply. He didn't need one. A week later, Derek opened the envelope. He read it slowly, then smiled faintly. He placed it beside his medals, not because he wanted to remember the humiliation, but because he wanted to remember that change starts with awareness. As he looked out his window that evening, he whispered softly, "One person learned today. Maybe tomorrow, the world learns too." Days turned into weeks, but the story refused to die. The video of the salute had taken the internet by storm. On social media, people dissected every second of the clip, the tension in the air, the stunned look on the manager's face, the quiet strength of Derek's expression. News channels ran segments titled, "Dignity Under Fire," and "When Prejudice Met Its Match." Derek Langston's name was suddenly everywhere again. Journalists tried to reach him for interviews, but he stayed silent. He wasn't interested in fame. He'd spent a lifetime avoiding the spotlight, working behind classified walls where names were erased from public memory for safety. Now the world was calling him a hero, but all he wanted was peace. At the bank, things were different too. Philip Corbin could barely meet anyone's eyes. Customers whispered as he passed. Some looked at him with judgment, others with pity. The corporate office had issued an apology and forced him through training programs, but the real punishment came from within, his own conscience. Every morning he looked at his reflection and saw a man who had failed a simple test of humanity. One afternoon, as he was preparing to leave early, his phone rang. The caller ID read, "Private number." He hesitated. Ted then answered. "Mr. Corbin," a deep, steady voice said. "This is Derek Langston." Corbin froze, gripping the phone tightly. "Mr. Langston, Colonel, I didn't expect—" "I'm not calling about the apology," Derek interrupted. "I wanted to talk about something else." Corbin's pulse quickened. "Anything, please." "I've been invited to speak at a leadership seminar next week," Derek said. "Topic: Bias and Responsibility in Modern America. I think you should attend." "Me?" Corbin blinked in disbelief. "Yes. Not as a manager, but as a man willing to face his mistakes publicly. It's not about humiliation, it's about growth." Corbin was silent for a moment, then whispered, "If you'll have me, I'll be there." The following Thursday, the auditorium at Jefferson Community Hall was filled with people, students, business leaders, journalists, veterans. On stage stood Derek, calm and poised in a simple navy suit. No medals, no badges, just a man with presence. He spoke slowly, his words measured, his tone commanding yet gentle. "We talk about equality as if it's a concept, but it's not. It's a practice. It's how we treat the person in front of us, especially when no one's watching. That's where real respect begins." The crowd listened in silence. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled. Derek continued, "I've been saluted by soldiers, respected by leaders, but none of it means anything if a man in a suit can't walk into a bank without suspicion." Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned toward the side of the stage. "Mr. Philip Corbin," he said, "please join me." A murmur rippled through the audience as Corbin walked up hesitantly. His suit looked pressed, but his face carried the weight of guilt. He stood beside Derek, avoiding eye contact. "This man," Derek said, "made a mistake, a painful one. But he also did something rare. He faced it. He reached out. He learned." Corbin took the microphone with trembling hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cracking, "I'm not proud of what I did. That day, I saw a threat instead of a customer. I let fear and bias guide me. I thought I was protecting my institution, but in truth, I was betraying my humanity." The audience was silent, their expressions softening. Corbin continued, "When Colonel Langston called me, I expected anger. Instead, he gave me an invitation to learn, to change, to stand here today and admit that I was wrong. And I am, deeply." He paused, turning to Derek. "You had every right to humiliate me, to destroy my career, but you chose mercy. You showed me that leadership isn't about power. It's about character." A long silence followed, then applause, slow at first, then rising, echoing across the hall. People stood clapping not just for Derek, but for what the moment represented: growth, forgiveness, humanity. After the event, reporters swarmed the stage. Derek shook Corbin's hand firmly, whispering, "You spoke your truth. That's courage." Corbin smiled faintly. "You gave me that courage." Later, as the crowd dispersed, a young woman approached Derek with tears in her eyes. "Sir," she said softly, "I'm the daughter of a man who was profiled at his workplace. They never apologized to him. Watching this gave me hope. Thank you." Derek placed a hand on her shoulder. Hope is how we rebuild the world, one person at a time. That night, back at home, Derek sat on his porch again. The stars shimmered faintly above, and the air was warm and still. He thought about how strange life could be, how a single moment of injustice could ignite change far beyond what anyone imagined. He wasn't naive. He knew one speech wouldn't erase centuries of bias, but it was a start, a spark in the dark. At that same moment, miles away, Corbin sat at his desk, writing in his journal. "Prejudice doesn't disappear when you deny it," he wrote. "It disappears when you face it. Today, I faced mine." He closed the book, took a deep breath, and looked out his window. Out at the city lights, Somewhere out there, Derek Langston was probably doing the same. Two men, once divided by fear, now united by a hard-earned lesson. And though they came from different worlds, that day, they both understood one truth. Respect isn't given by status or uniform. It's earned by the way you treat others when you have the power not to. The weeks after the seminar changed everything for both men. The video of Derek and Corbin sharing the stage became a symbol of reconciliation. It was reposted across platforms with captions like, "This is what growth looks like," and "When forgiveness becomes power." Schools invited Derek to speak. Corporations requested training sessions. Even the local mayor called, asking him to lead a new community initiative on racial awareness and leadership ethics. For Derek, it wasn't about fame, it was about purpose. He had spent years defending his country from threats abroad, but now he realized there was a different kind of battle at home. One fought not with weapons, but with empathy and understanding. Meanwhile, Corbin's life took a quieter but no less significant turn. The corporate board decided to keep him on probation instead of firing him. Yet instead of resentment, he felt relief. He volunteered to assist with diversity programs and visited schools, telling students about what he had learned. Every time he spoke, he began with the same line, "I thought I understood fairness, until the day I didn't." One chilly morning, Derek received a letter in the mail. It bore the seal of the Department of Defense. He opened it, scanning the official language, and paused when he reached the end. "In recognition of your continued service to community integrity and national unity, the department invites you to keynote the Veterans Honor Conference in Washington, D.C." He smiled softly. It had been years since he'd stood on a federal stage. For a long time, he'd tried to distance himself from the public eye, but perhaps this was his calling now, to bridge the gap between military discipline and moral leadership. When he arrived in Washington, the city was alive with energy. The conference hall gleamed with banners, flags, and rows of uniformed veterans. But Derek noticed something else. Ordinary citizens in the crowd, teachers, bank tellers, small business owners, all gathered to hear him speak. The moderator introduced him warmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Colonel Derek Langston, a man whose strength doesn't come from rank, but from grace." Applause thundered through the hall as Derek took the stage. He stood silently for a few seconds, letting the crowd settle. Then he began. "Every soldier learns that enemies aren't always visible. Sometimes they live inside us, in the form of fear, prejudice, or pride. And the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves." The audience leaned in. His voice was calm, deliberate, and filled with quiet conviction. "I was once called a hero for my service overseas, but recently, I was treated like a criminal in my own country. The man who called the FBI on me wasn't evil. He was afraid. And fear, when left unchecked, turns into judgment. But judgment can be unlearned, and fear can be overcome." A hush filled the hall. Derek continued, "We can't erase history, but we can choose what kind of future we build. It starts with one question. When you look at someone, do you see a threat? Or do you see a story?" The room erupted into applause. Among the audience, a familiar face watched with tears in his eyes. Philip Corbin. He hadn't told Derek he was coming. He just wanted to listen. When the speech ended, Derek stepped down from the stage and spotted him. They shared a nod across the crowd, a silent acknowledgement that healing was ongoing, and it was real. Later, during the evening banquet, Derek was approached by a young soldier. "Sir," he said, "I saw your video online. My father faced discrimination his whole life. Seeing, if you handle it with so much calm, it taught me more about strength than any drill ever did." Derek smiled. "Real strength," he said, "isn't about control. It's about composure." Back home, the bank had changed too. Jefferson State Bank introduced a new policy. Every employee had to attend empathy and ethics training, including upper management. Corbin helped design the program. He titled it "Seeing Beyond the Surface." The initiative gained national attention. News outlets covered it as a groundbreaking step toward fairer corporate culture. One journalist even wrote, "A mistake turned into a movement, and it began with humility." Weeks later, Derek received another letter, this one handwritten. It was from Brianna, the teller from that day. Dear Colonel Langston, I still remember your calm when everything fell apart around you. I wanted to say I'm sorry for not standing up when I should have. I was afraid of my boss, but watching you handle everything with grace taught me courage. I'm starting law school next year because I want to fight injustice where it begins, in systems, not just moments. Thank you for inspiring me. Derek read it twice, then folded it carefully. That letter meant more to him than any medal he'd ever received. He looked out his window that night, the city lights glowing like scattered stars. For the first time in a long time, he felt something new. Not pride, not vindication, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've turned pain into purpose. And far away, in his small apartment, Corbin sat at his kitchen table sipping tea. His teenage son walked in. Dad, the boy said, they talked about you in my ethics class today. The teacher said you owned up to your mistake like a man. I'm proud of you. Corbin looked at his son speechless. A tear slid down his cheek. Thank you, son, he whispered. That night, two men, one once accused, one once ashamed, both slept soundly under the same sky, their hearts lighter than they'd been in years. They were living proof that sometimes the story doesn't end when justice is. That night, two men, one once accused, one once ashamed, both slept soundly under the same sky, their hearts lighter than they'd been in years. They were living proof that sometimes the story doesn't end when justice is served. It continues when understanding begins. Months had passed since that unforgettable day at the bank, but the ripple of that event still moved quietly through the lives it touched. Derek Langston had become a name people spoke with respect, not because he demanded it, but because he represented something rare, a calm force in a world addicted to outrage. Everywhere he went, people approached him with stories. A young teacher told him she'd shown the video to her students to teach empathy. A police cadet said it changed how he looked at civilians. Even business leaders invited him to speak about leadership and fairness. Derek never turned them down. He saw each invitation as another step in building a world that judged less and understood more. But not all attention was kind. Some critics claimed he was capitalizing on victimhood, that he was using one incident for fame. Derek never responded. He knew better than anyone that truth didn't need defending. It simply endured. Still, behind his quiet eyes, there were moments when the exhaustion returned. He had spent years serving in silence, and now he was forced to become a public face for something he never asked to represent. One evening, as he left a conference, he saw someone waiting near the parking lot. It was Corbin. He looked different, older, humbler, and more at ease. Colonel Langston, he greeted softly. I didn't want to intrude. I just needed to see you. Derek nodded. You're not intruding. How's life treating you, Philip? Corbin smiled faintly. Better. I was promoted last month, not for position, but for integrity work. They said the empathy program I started has been adopted by 3 other branches. Derek chuckled lightly. That's good news. You turned your mistake into a legacy. Corbin's voice trembled. Only because you gave me the chance to. He hesitated, then said quietly, They're hosting a community award event next week. They're honoring you for your work in reforming policy across banks nationwide. I'll be presenting the award. I hope you'll come. Derek was surprised. He wasn't one for ceremonies, but something in Corbin's eyes, the sincerity, the humility, made him say yes. A week later, the event hall was filled with executives, journalists, and civic leaders. A large banner read, National Integrity Award, honoring service beyond duty. Derek sat near the back, preferring anonymity, but the spotlight soon found him. The announcer's voice echoed. Tonight's honoree is a man who faced prejudice with patience and responded to injustice with dignity. Please welcome Colonel Derek Langston. Applause thundered across the room. Derek rose slowly, walking toward the stage. Corbin stood there holding the award plaque, a sleek glass piece engraved with the words "Respect begins with awareness." As Derek approached, Corbin's eyes glistened. Colonel Langston, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The day I met you, I made the worst mistake of my career. I thought I was protecting my institution, But you taught me that institutions mean nothing without integrity. You showed me what real leadership looks like, not from behind a desk, but in the way you chose forgiveness over fury. He turned to the audience. This man changed my life, and through me he's changed hundreds of others. It's my greatest honor to present this award to him. The audience erupted in applause as Derek accepted the plaque. For a moment, he just looked at it quietly. Then he turned toward the crowd and spoke. Forgiveness isn't weakness, he began, his deep voice steady. It's the discipline of strength. It's easier to react with anger. It's harder to respond with grace. But grace changes people. He looked at Corbin. I didn't forgive him because he deserved it. I forgave him because I wanted to live in a world where we can learn instead of hate, where we can rebuild instead of destroy. The room went silent. So silent you could hear the hum of the lights. Then slowly people began to rise. The standing ovation was thunderous, not for fame, not for spectacle, but for truth. After the event, reporters surrounded Derek asking for comments. But he excused himself quietly and stepped outside. The night air was cool, calm, peaceful. Corbin joined him a moment later, his voice barely a whisper. You could have humiliated me on that stage. You could have made me the villain. Derek shook his head. There are no villains in this story, Philip. Only people who needed to see clearer. Corbin nodded, tears in his eyes. You've made me a better man. Derek smiled gently. Then it was all worth it. They stood there in silence for a while, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Neither said much more. They didn't need to. The story that began with fear had now turned into friendship. Later that week, Derek visited a veterans community center where he volunteered. He sat with a group of young recruits who had seen the viral video. One of them asked, Sir, weren't you angry that day? Weren't you humiliated? Derek thought for a long moment. At first, yes, but anger is temporary. What lasts is the choice you make afterward. I chose to be better, not bitter. The young soldier nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. Derek continued, Never let someone's ignorance make you forget your dignity, because when you stay composed, you take away their power and replace it with your own. The room was silent again, filled not with pity, but with respect. That night, when Derek drove home, he glanced at the award sitting on the passenger seat. It shimmered under the streetlights, but what it represented meant more than any title ever could. He parked, stepped out, and looked up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, thousands of people had seen his story, and maybe, just maybe, one of them had learned to pause before judging someone else. As he walked into his quiet home, he whispered softly, if even one person changed, then everything was worth it. And in the stillness of that night, the man once suspected as a criminal had become something far greater, an instrument of change. The sun rose gently over Little Rock, painting the sky in gold and rose. It had been a year since that unforgettable day at Jefferson State Bank, the day suspicion met grace and prejudice met patience. The world had moved on, but for the people involved, the echoes of that moment still shaped their lives in quiet, powerful ways. Derek Langston woke early, as he always did. The discipline of years in service never left him. He stood on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the first light filter through the trees. A letter sat unopened on his table, delivered the evening before. It bore the logo of Jefferson State Bank. He smiled faintly and opened it. Dear Colonel Langston, 1 year ago, you walked into our bank, and my fear almost destroyed my career and my conscience. Today, I'm proud to tell you that the See Beyond the Surface initiative has now expanded to 27 branches nationwide. Because of your example, we've helped hundreds of employees confront their own hidden biases. I'll never forget what you taught me. Respectfully, Philip Corbin. Derek read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. He didn't need validation, but it warmed his heart to know that something good had grown from something painful. He placed the letter beside his medals again, right next to Corbin's first apology from months ago. To him, they weren't reminders of humiliation. They were symbols of change. Later that day, Derek prepared for another speaking engagement. This one wasn't a grand event, not a televised conference or government forum. It was a visit to a local high school. He preferred these moments where change began small, honest, and unfiltered. The auditorium was filled with teenagers, restless but curious. The principal introduced him warmly. "Students, this is Colonel Derek Langston. He's here to talk not about war or medals, but about respect." When Derek took the stage, the students quieted. He didn't start with a speech. Instead, he held up his federal ID card and said, "This piece of plastic once made someone call the FBI on me, not because it was fake, but because of who they saw holding it." The students shifted, their eyes wide. He smiled gently. "That day taught me something important. Ignorance can humiliate you only if you let it, but calm turns judgment into reflection." He walked slowly across the stage, his tone steady. "The world will always test your worth. People will doubt you for how you look, where you're from, what you wear. But your dignity," he paused, "must never depend on their understanding." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Students stood, clapping not out of politeness, but because they felt something shift within them. Some even had tears in their eyes. Afterward, a young boy approached him shyly. "Sir," he said, "I get picked on because of how I talk. I thought I had to fight back, but now I think I can just prove them wrong with how I live." Derek smiled. "That's exactly how you win, son. Quiet strength always outlasts loud ignorance." As he drove home, Derek thought about how strange life was, how one act of prejudice had transformed into a nationwide message of respect. Sometimes the greatest victories came not from battles fought with fists or words, but from moments endured with grace. That evening, his phone buzzed. It was a video call request from Philip Corbin. Derek answered with a grin. "Colonel," Corbin greeted warmly. His background showed a conference room filled with posters that read, "Diversity starts with awareness." "I wanted to tell you personally, we're hosting our first National Ethics Symposium next month, and the keynote speaker, if he agrees, will be you." Derek laughed softly. "You never stop pushing, do you?" "Not when it matters," Corbin replied. "We've come full circle, sir, and I couldn't have done it without you." Derek nodded. "You did it because you chose to learn. That's what matters." Corbin smiled. "Still, I owe you everything. The man I was that day, he doesn't exist anymore." "That's the point," Derek said. "None of us should stay the same once we see the truth." The call ended with a sense of mutual respect, the kind forged only through hard lessons and genuine humility. Later that night, Derek stood outside once more. The stars shimmered faintly above, the air calm and still. He thought about how everything had begun with a simple act of mistrust, and how it had unfolded into something much bigger than himself. His neighbor, an elderly woman, waved from her porch. "Evening, Colonel, they're still talking about you on the news again. You must be proud." Derek smiled. "Not proud, ma'am. Grateful. Proud fades. Grateful lasts." As the night deepened, he sat down with his old journal, the same one he'd kept during his military years, and began to write. "A year ago, I walked into a bank to move my own money. I walked out having moved hearts instead. Sometimes the greatest service you can give your country isn't on the battlefield, it's in how you treat the people standing across from you." He closed the journal and looked toward the sky one last time. In that moment, the world felt balanced, peaceful, almost poetic. The next morning, as the sun rose again over Little Rock, life carried on as usual. Cars passing, people hurrying to work, the smell of fresh coffee, wafting from cafes. Yet somewhere, in countless hearts across the nation, a quiet truth remained. Respect isn't about status, wealth, or power. It's about humanity. And for Derek Langston, the man once accused, once doubted, that truth had become his mission. His legacy wasn't written in medals or headlines, but in the silent change he inspired in others. He had turned judgment into education, fear into understanding, and hate into humility. And that, he thought, smiling softly to himself, was the truest salute of all.